Welcome to another episode of the Midwest Artisan. I'm your host, Andy Hinkle.
And I'm your co-host, Dalton McCleary.
Dalton, how you doing?
Doing all right, Andy. How about you?
Doing all right, dude. Yeah, it's been a while, just start of a year. I'm sure you can attest to that. Just a lot of beginning of the year movements, and yeah, just trying to figure out how some goals for this year, and trying really hard, pulling something out of Aaron Francis' book, and so for I don't know about you, but for me personally, I'm ready to take on more than ever this year and try really hard, push really hard to just hopefully not push myself to burnout, but just gotta have some healthy phases. But
just hard enough.
That's,
You
that's
gotta
just
get
how
that,
I'm feeling.
that passion
Just how I'm feeling.
running.
I got a bit of a fire under me lately, just to I don't know, just feeling more passionate than ever, especially when you have children. I know you don't have children, and I know you have your own passion as well, and so I'm not saying anything like that, but it really fires you up just to kind of build a good foundation for them to grow up into, so yeah.
Damn, you starting out the first
Deep.
episode.
Yeah.
Real deep.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you got a fire, can you at least help melt some of this snow that we got in the Midwest?
Yeah.
Because, geez.
Yeah, we lost power, and I did a puzzle for the first time. We had a crazy ice storm here. Just to kind of give some context, here in the Midwest, we had a crazy ice storm. I lost power. You said you did not lose power, right?
I did,
But
I had an
did a
alarm
puzzle.
issue.
Oh yeah, did a puzzle for the first time in years, probably since I was a teenager. So that was exciting. My wife and I just got together, we put the flashlight on, just did a puzzle. So it was good. So you said your alarm went off, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm laughing at the thought of you guys in like headlamps sitting at your dining room table in the dark, putting together a puzzle. Yeah,
Yeah.
we live downtown, and like a big water main break happened in the road next to us, and that set off the entire apartment complex's fire alarm. So every single unit was all blaring, and people outside. And it was like 2 a.m. that night on a Sunday, and I was like, you know what? I'm not going outside. It's like 9 degrees. I'm just going to stay in here and blow out my eardrums. And it lasted for about 30 minutes. And that was real fun. Right on a Sunday night. You got to love it.
Dude, that'd be, for me, that'd be terrifying. You know that apartment complex that collapsed in Florida? Don't remember the exact location, but this was like 2 years ago. I'll get too into the off topic here in the weeds, but it was like a couple of years ago. This entire like really nice apartment complex collapsed. Like the building completely just collapsed. But right before it happened, they had like a water leak, and the alarm went off. Similar to your case, they had a significant water leak, and the water was just so heavy on the unit that it collapsed, and it just fell on, basically all the units just collapsed on each other. So a horrific thing, like hundreds of people died. So not too scary
Well,
when that happened.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, the water leak.
Nightmare fuel. Appreciate that.
So that would terrify me if the alarm came on in the middle of the night, because that's what happened, but that would terrify me. But glad you're safe. Glad
Thanks, man.
you're
You as well.
digging yourself out. So have you been outside? I know. Have you been outside in the snow?
Can you tell by my
No.
pasty whiteness that I have not seen the sunlight in, well, yeah, about a week. Or no, it's been
Okay.
a little longer
Yeah,
than
that's
2
good.
weeks since the snow. No, my window is still like frozen. Like the ice on my window, I can't see out my window. It's still frozen.
Nice.
That's how bad it is
Yeah,
outside.
I pretty much refuse to go outside too. It's like 15 degrees, awful, like just miserable to step outside, and windy. But my little boy, he's almost 2 now, and just wants to go outside and dive in the snow, just face first, just So yeah, it's great
Aw.
timing. It makes it much
that's-
easier. So
Yeah, that's cute. Post a video of him diving.
yeah,
I
I'll
wanna see
have to
that.
yeah, we'll have to do that. All right, let's get into it. There's been a lot of great stuff moving with Laravel and the web dev community. Saw you put on here was big content releases with Laravel.
Yeah, I've been trying to get on Twitter again in the new year, just to follow some people like Aaron Francis and Taylor Otwell. And I've seen that Taylor's been retweeting a lot of stuff about this big like content trip that Laravel went on recently to Excel,
Mhm.
where they're basically, I assume since they funded them, but lots of good like little teasers of them saying, "Hey, we've recorded some podcasts, and we've interviewed Taylor Otwell, and there might be something new with these interviews because, how do you interview somebody who's been interviewed thousands of times before? He's been a pretty big face in Laravel. And they were demoing a bunch of cloud stuff. So that just it gets my mind wondering of, where Laravel puts their focus and what do they see going forward past, the release of Laravel Cloud and the release of Laravel Nightwatch. Like it really seems that they're trying to push this this like content studio type approach where they've got that Josh Seary guy.
Yeah, he's good.
Sorry, I was waiting for one of my stuff to go off because I said the S word. But like, it's just wild to see the growth that Laravel's been going in just in the last like 6 months. Like before the summer, we didn't know anything about any of this stuff, and now it just seems like not only did they put the pedal to the metal, they like jammed their foot through the floor.
Yeah,
and
I love it.
It's wild to see from where we started. I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on Laravel's like almost content first approach on some of the stuff that they're doing recently?
Yeah, it's very cool to see. Just like to your point, like 6 months or before the announcement, before everything, it was just kind of this like little frame, or it wasn't little, but this framework that was just driven by the open source community, and now it's really become into a full company and this transition, and I feel like it's been really good for them. Obviously, taking any type of VC can be kind of scary, for the control that they can put into. And it kind of makes me wonder too, like what kind of content that they're doing. I guess my guess would be kind of talking his philosophy on cloud and where it's at today and where it's going to be in the future. Kind of what you're alluding to, answering those questions of like where Laravel is going to go there. A lot of people have been wondering, are we still going to take Laravel Vapor along for the ride? And because it's Laravel Cloud and Laravel Vapor are kind of similar. Well, they're very vastly different, but they're kind of similar in some aspects. They both use AWS. They, kind of serverless architecture, and that's something you may want to do with cloud. So, but he's just said, hey, we're still going to be doing all that. We're still going to be maintaining and continuing that structure. And so I love that he's still the Taylor that I knew 10 years ago. During this transition, he just has not changed. Always just giving it everything he has, and just not letting up. And then also like continuing to do like PRs in Laravel. Like he's the only one that can use just the merge. Yeah, and so it's just so cool to see that in the community. And now more than ever with this whole like WordPress, I don't know if that's this whole WordPress dropout, but I'm seeing on Twitter anyway, I'm seeing so many developers asking questions about where do I learn Laravel. This seems really exciting, really cool. And I know some of that was driven by Primogen. He did a live stream like using Laravel. And I think a lot of WordPress developers are kind of like, maybe they're nervous. I don't know what's going on. And I think this is just my guess, but I think they see all this stuff by Primogen. They see, I know PHP Meg had just transitioned to Laravel. And I see a lot of people asking, where do I learn Laravel? And I see Jeffrey or whoever's running Laracast Twitter account reply to all of them like, but he gets tagged a lot from just community members like it's Laracast, and even over on Reddit, like we've been picking up heavily on like, hey guys, where's the best place to learn Laravel? And it's on our FAQ. People post, and it's like we have a bot that kind of scans for that stuff and immediately removes it. But we've been seeing a lot of that traffic too, of those posts being pulled down way more than normal. People asking like, what do we learn? And so it's really cool to see like it's really taken off. And I still strongly believe to this day, like Laravel is really hard to beat, just for any web dev project.
Yeah, they've what did we say it last time that they were getting very Apple-esque? Like when you think of web development, PHP web development, Laravel is sort of the Apple of that thing. And I see Laravel Cloud is like their new iPhone, and Laravel Vapor is sort of last generation iPhone type, stuff like the iPhone, whatever the hell number we're on now, 16, 17, and Vapor is like iPhone 13 or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, so they're still going to maintain
releases.
it. But I do expect Cloud to sort of eclipse Vapor at some point. I don't think they'll ever get rid of Forge because that's your own server. You can do whatever you want. But I don't know. I see a lot of they're pushing a lot of this content type stuff a lot more than I've seen any other like web framework company ever do. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
It'll be interesting. Like you mentioned, being very Apple like. It's funny because when I was at Laracon watching the announcement of Cloud, Justin Jackson was sitting next to me, and by the third time that Taylor called out somebody else from his team to like talk about a subject, he goes, "Are we at like an Apple conference?" Like, because that it's pretty much next. I'm going to bring out the new lead of design at at Laravel, and he brings him on. It was just something like Tim Cook did, you know. So it was. Just kind of flipping between different subjects to different contexts instead of, Laracon in Chicago, he talked about Nova. This is 2018, I think, when I was there. He talked about Nova, but then like the rest of the hour spent about talking about what's new in Laravel, and it was not like it was a lot of context switching. Yeah, it's crazy how much the community continues to grow.
Yeah, and they ain't gonna stop in the time soon, especially with
Yeah,
that
Chris Sev.
57 mil.
Did you see Chris Sev this morning? Yeah, he's the director of DevRel at Laravel. So just hired today, an hour ago, he announced. So
Wow.
he's been he's really, yeah, he's the, as his wife says, his wife did a Laracon or talk, a really good talk this past year. He says that he's pretty sure that he's Laravel's number 2 fan next to Abigail. So yeah.
All right, all
Yeah,
right.
we'll
We
see.
see you,
Yeah.
Chris. We see you. Okay, good.
Yeah, it's been
Good,
good.
good.
It'll be cool to.
Hey,
I'm so excited for these interviews. Like any of them, I'm just like I have to drop whatever I'm doing. Like I gotta watch this. It's just I don't know, just so powerful, and just watch
it's
these kind
exciting.
of things.
Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's odd to be excited about. Like I don't know if it's
yes.
odd, but it's odd to be excited
Code
about like
programming. Yeah, yeah,
developer
it's good.
interviews. You see a lot of A-list people doing interviews for movies or whatever, and it's I don't know. It's good. I think it brings some good excitement to Laravel instead of letting it be stale 24/7 and sort of outdated documentations. Like it's healthy. And
But last show we talked about model-based migrations. About the kind of the concept of it. This is something like I thought about. I briefly mentioned it last show, and I feel like we need it in Laravel, if it's a community package. But I wanted to talk about your thoughts on overcoming some of the hurdles. So to explain model-based migrations, do you want to have a stab at it, or do you want me to go through it?
you will probably say it better than I will because I will stumble my way through it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a tricky thing to explain, but so imagine you have a user model, and inside there you have a method called schema, and it returns a blueprint. And then inside there you're gonna have like your instead of migrations that you would typically have, you would have like the migration blueprint inside this method. And when you click like or you enter in a command like migration generate, and what it does is it looks at your migrations folder, and it runs through all your migrations to the very end, and then it looks at each of your models. In this case, it's going to look at your user model and look through if there's any changes in the schema, and then if there is one, it's going to create a new migration and add it to the end of the migration files. So with the end goal of your user model, the schema in the user model is one-to-one to your database. So you can go in, look at it as, like in reference or something. Or if you want to make a quick change, you don't have to fully understand how it works. Like I feel like every time I have to make a database change, I need to manually go look at tables plus, or I have to use that console command like show, model show, and then it'll kind of give me some details in there. But then there's some things missing. Like you got to be aware of any like Postgres methods or anything kind of fancy happening. So that's where it kind of gets blurry inside the lines. So that's kind of explaining model-based migrations. Symfony has this. It's worked differently, but I think like this would be the best way for it to work in Laravel. Symfony has like entities, right? Is that the right name of it? And
Yeah.
they kind of work differently. So, but yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. And I personally would love it. Just you open up user model, and boom, there's your schema for your user model. And if you make an update. So did I explain that well? Do you have anything to start off from that? I can go into the problems of why this feature has kind of died over the years, but
It's been elusive. I think that's literally one of the biggest things that I like about Symfony is that I don't really have to keep up with migration files, or making sure that, hey, I need to change one column to another column. I got to make a whole migration file, make sure that runs, et cetera, et cetera. If I can just go into my model, say, hey, this column is now this or whatever, and it just sort of does that Laravel thing where it just works, would be the icing on the cake. I mean, yes, there are
Yeah.
problems, but I think you explained it pretty well. You basically manage the schema of the model in the model file. You don't really have to worry about migration files.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Which, go ahead. Yeah.
well, I was going to say, which is fine. I think it's just preference based, but if you have to do, if it's one less file you have to go look into, I think that's a big enough pro to at least try it. But we know that there are some cons. So like, what's you said you had some
Yeah.
cons, right? What's your
Well,
biggest
yeah.
con?
Well, just the develop, like just actually getting it to work properly. Well, let's just take like migrations out of the picture of like say migrations aren't a thing anymore. It looks does a live look at your database, does a comparison with your schema table. So migrations are essentially eliminated. So you could do something like that approach as well. The problem is the comparison. At least today, there's not a way to like Laravel can look at your migrations, run all the way through, and then go look at your user table and then see the difference and then know what to apply in the diff, of like, oh, we need to apply an index here, and he included one. Or if like renaming a table, the schema has like rename in there. So are you gonna have all these random rename things in your method, like just kind of littered through there? Or I guess you could probably clean it up a little bit and adding a chain like rename, but then it gets kind of like you say like rename active at, and then change that to is active or something. It's just going to continue to chain in there. So, but Laravel doesn't have a great way to kind of do a diff of the incoming versus current, and then apply the diff, if that makes sense, of in a new migration or something like that. So it's kind of just a programming thing that you'd have to solve of like how to get through the ORM, and so it's really tricky.
Yeah, you're fighting the framework a lot at this
Yeah.
point, like a lot, and that's just smells too bad. So yeah, I think that's probably your biggest con is that. Why would you do this? Like, what's the benefit? It's all in nice. It's all nice in one file. Yeah, that's pretty sweet. But a major version update could just totally break model-based migrations, and then you just have to do the old way anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't. It's great. I would love for it to be baked in and have some sort of really nice way where I want to add a new column to my users table. Of like Google ID for whenever I do Google Auth, and I don't have to make a whole new migration file and all of that junk. It would be such a nice handy thing to have for quick, fast development, which is what I think Laravel is trying to push for, is that they're the number one like fast stuff. But so I think there's something you could probably hack together where it would probably work pretty nice.
Mm-hmm.
But man, it would kind of be a headache to do all of the databases like Postgres.
The diff, yeah.
Would be a little nasty. You know what I mean?
There are sometimes I still use migrations. Like for example, not too long ago, I changed like a permission or a role to go from the name of string of admin to super admin. And so I needed it to happen in a migration versus actually like pushing it to prod. Oh, okay, I need to go to Table Plus and edit that. It's just I need it to all happen like at the same time. So I feel like there's still a place for migrations, but it would be kind of cool. So TLDR of this, it'd be you have your schema in your user model, and then you type in Artisan migration generate, and it just like generates you the migration of that. Jason McQuarrie, the JMac, the Laravel Shift, he has Blueprint, which kind of does that some way. Basically, you write, I think it's in YAML, you write pretty much your entire Laravel models in your app, and you write some commands with his package, and it generates these migrations and stuff for you. And so, but the idea is like you can you can base, you can create all these models and stuff off business requirements. And it's like, as you're doing the documentation, you can just write up like a YAML file of like what it would look like, and then input that into blueprint, I think he calls it, and then generate your code. So kind of an interesting concept. So I'm curious to I might poke around there to his code base to see what's happening and what he's doing in migrations and how he's handling that. I don't think he's doing a diff. Maybe he is. Maybe he's doing some fancy stuff. He's a smart dude. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, Jason, the gauntlet has been thrown. Figure this out for us, please, and thanks.
he had some actually undocumented on Laravel. He had a really good PR come not too long ago. It was called like preventable or something like. It's a new trait. You include it in your command, and basically once you include this trait in your command, it will not allow it to run in production like an Artisan command. So it's like prevents destructive actions. And so had a use case of that as well, because there's some things you want to run locally or on staging, but definitely not in production.
Get your heart palpitations.
Yeah, it's just like, so it rejects it, doesn't allow you to run it. So he submitted that. It's not documented anywhere, so it's kind of like one of those little nuggets. There's some things by Taylor he just like, yeah, it's anything undocumented is kind of scary way to go, right? Because if you include it into your code base, I've seen it before where Taylor's like, yeah, it's undocumented, so we're going to remove this. So it's like, whoa, it's pretty impactful. And so that can be a little tough sometimes, but there's a lot of like undocumented nuggets, or occasionally I'll submit a PR and Taylor's like, yeah, I don't want to submit this in right now, for various reasons. I understand it from him of. There's some methods that if you're reading this as a new person, you don't want to assume that this is the default. It's one of those like you really have to have some really complex like ends of the earth like stuff in Laravel to go here, and obviously he doesn't want to type that stuff up like this is an advanced method or whatever. So I get it, but it's just one of those. It's like you try to, for him, I think he's just trying to find that line of making sense in the documentation. Where does it go? But yeah, it's tricky.
It's like the secret menu of In-N-Out. There's a secret menu to Laravel. Right. There's some methods that nobody knows unless you like dive into the source code.
Yeah, that's fun. If you ever you have a couple minutes, just like you're in Laravel, just right click and go a little bit of source diving. It's a fun thing to do. Just like understanding how it works, and everything is a collection. If you're wondering, everything is converted into a Laravel collection. It's fascinating.
Yeah, there should be a new term for that. Whenever you dive into an open source's source code, like you've got spelunking, when you're like mining and stuff. We'll workshop that later. What we want to call diving into Laravel source code to find their quote unquote secret menu.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe that'll be another topic. We'll talk about secret menu stuff next time.
We should do like, I'm going to add this. We should do a topic on undocumented Laravel things, because I have a notebook like where I run into this stuff and occasionally I'll submit a PR on it, and a few of them have been denied, and I'll talk about those. So
yeah. I agree. Well, I mean, speaking of like secret menu stuff, I don't know how often you work with Filament outside of the Filament panel, but I have been introduced to a few projects recently about using Filament like components, like input fields and section groupings outside of the Filament panel. So basically, just like in a blade view, randomly, like in a random blade view. But it's actually quite nice, and I find myself reaching for it now that I'm doing a couple other new projects about using Filament. It's got me thinking of like, why have I never thought of doing this before? Like using Filament's input fields for a form instead of building my own input fields and, my own custom wrappers with Alpine that says, hey, if you've got an error, change the border to red and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm curious on your thoughts of Filament outside of Filament. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, that's actually how Filament markets itself, and because I think that's how what Taylor has. I keep mentioning Taylor for some reason. Taylor has mentioned of like that was his understanding of what Filament is. It's like a way to build your front end and back end, And people that you actually use Filament, it's used in kind of a way like this is where the comparison of Nova comes in. It's used just strictly on the back end. And so, but then what a lot of people don't realize is that you can take the same components and use them on the front end. And so that's really cool. My thing of like why I always paused is, well, traditionally I just already have the front end done and the admin kind of comes in later. But then secondly, it's just like for styling. So I'm curious, like, okay, how does that, I hate talking code like out loud, but how does that work on the front end with styling? If I want to include a filament form on the front end, how do you do that and include like the site styling?
I think you just include so Filament publishes like its own CSS and JavaScript. I think you just include those as is.
So in the admin panel, does it look the same as your front end then? Is that how it works?
Well, no, it's like vice versa. So you would use your own like app layout blade file and just
Okay.
say, hey, X filament button, and that would be the filament button. And since it's Tailwind, I think you can either include filament stuff, or what this project does is it just searches the filament vendor file in your Tailwind config, as a source,
Yeah.
saying, hey, anything in here that has Tailwind components we want to extract into, your style sheet. And so you just include your one style sheet. And I think at least the JavaScript file, because it's got Alpine and Livewire, so you don't really need that.
Mm-hmm.
But
That's fascinating.
it's odd, and I've only seen it on enterprise level stuff. So like the stuff we were doing before was all, let's put it in a filament panel. It's probably going to be a CMS or CRM. We don't really need to manage the view. We'll just let Filament handle all the view stuff. But if it's like this enterprise app that I'm working on, they want to have a brand for it, but they don't really want to sort of build this whole UI kit. Like, let's just use Filament as the UI kit and put our own styles, on the buttons. Like the primary button is whatever blue color we want, and the warning is whatever yellow color we want. It is a different way of thinking it. And I guess I was one of those people who was like, I always just thought Filament was like Nova. Like you only use it in its panel as its own little slice of your application that sits alongside all your other code. But this one's like, yeah, you're integrating it in almost like, Flux components, essentially. The inputs, the sections, you can sort of style those how you want. It's weird. It's kind of just like a UI kit at this point.
That's wild to think about in that way. I love how you can set it up on the back end and the front end, and it's one to one. It's mirrored to each other. Because I mean, how many times I'm guilty of this, of like where I changed a front end value, like on a form or something, to some context, and then I push it, and then I get some other task that, hey, Filament's broken or the admin panel is not working as it should. And then I have to like, oh yeah, I need to go fix that in the admin panel too. And we have, obviously we can have tests and other things. It could be, if it's mirrored to each other, you have one singular test that checks Filament. You don't have two tests for the front end and the back end, or checking for Filament. That's a drag to do, by the way. Like, there's so many times I'm like, I have to go back to Filament and create a test for that in the back end, and I have to do the front end on the same form and just make sure it works. But anywho, yeah, that's very interesting. So let me ask you, if you have a back end, you have a form, like a contact form, and but on the front end you want to add extra spacing, or you're locked in on a particular styling where you have to, like, you have two inputs side by side to each other, but maybe the front end it's just too tight and you want to make them like full width on and stack on top of each other. Instead of 50%, you would go full width. So have you gotten that far, or is it like to figure out how to do that, or like can you in Filament like add an extra attribute, like, hey, if this is front end, do this class, or how does that work?
Yeah, so admittedly, I'm only like a week new to this, and that seems like an advanced secret menu question. So I don't have your specific answer, but I know that they use their own layout file here. So it's not the Filament sidebar and it's not the Filament top bar. It's its own. It doesn't have any of that. So they've got their own sort of layout, but it uses the default styling for like sections and field groups and inputs and buttons and stuff like that. So it's more of a way to I guess get around whatever layout Filament imposes with it being the sidebar, the collapsible stuff. And admittedly, I don't know the decision on why this was made. I just was like, that's a pretty cool, I guess, use case of Filament as a UI kit. And what really fired my brain is that we've been talking ever since Nova came out. We were talking about using Nova as a CMS and having this sort of live page builder. Like when you're building a page in Nova as a CMS, I want to see a preview of it on the side. We talked about this for years. I don't know if you remember.
Yep, I do remember that. Yeah.
And we were using whatever nestable, repeatable package for Nova at the time. We're like, I can't wait for this to be live preview. And the Filament came out. We're like, well, you kind of probably could do that now with Livewire. And I think now using Filament as a UI kit, you could theoretically build that sort of idea of a live preview, live editing page builder.
Yeah.
As its own UI kit, you're not constrained to sort of Filament's stuff. So I think
that's good.
I think I'm going to try that now.
Yeah.
So I might have some more stuff to report on how to use Filament outside of Filament, but it's got my gears turning.
Yeah, that live preview stuff is cool, especially on CMSs where, we at the agency we get clients sometimes, not too often, but they want to actually see real time. Like they type in something before they hit save, what it's going to look like, because when they hit save, it's going to be. It's kind of this whole this whole cycle, because if they hit save, it's going to be instantly live, but if they hit like draft or something. Then the page is going to be unpublished. Then they have to go look at it, then republish page. So doing the live preview kind of eliminates all those needs of like, hey, here's what it's going to look like. File uploads will be tricky. I'm curious how you're going to tackle that. But yeah, like images and stuff like that. But it'll be good.
That hurts my brain to think about. Well,
we'll get there.
That's curious. On my radar.
We'll talk about it. Yeah,
I wanna try a live page builder with using Filament outside of Filament.
Yeah.
And I'll report back.
So good. Yeah. So Dan, what's his name? The Filament guy, Dan.
Dan Hart.
Yeah.
Harden.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. He works for like a company. All their code is public, and it's like so cool to see. Obviously, it's all like licensed, so you can't reuse it or you can't do any of that, but it's just so cool to see that all their code like out there in public. It's Canyon GBS, I think the name of it. But they're doing something similar over there, and that was the first time I seen that, and I was like, wow, that's a really neat way to approach that of going on the front end and the back end. So yeah, it's really neat.
Yeah, just another little like tool belt thing I think you can use. If there's something wicked complicated in Filament and you can't do it in a Filament page, why don't you bring Filament to your own page?
I'm all about one source of truth. Yeah.
Filament outside of Filament. Hashtag.
Mm-hmm.
Not a sponsor. Just kidding. I do sponsor Filament, but they don't sponsor us. Moving on.
Sure. Yeah. So one thing I wanted to bring up is Mockery, and I'm not talking about the HTTP facade mocks. Those are great, or anything with like Laravel's facade mocking, like QMock or QFakes.
QFake.
Yeah, those are great. But I'm talking about the Mockery library. Like that is just unbelievably hard. I don't understand why it's so hard. I don't get the Mockery library. I see so many examples. Like what the heck does a partial mean? I'm even dumb.
Or an alias or overlay.
Yeah, alias.
Like,
yeah.
What do I use those for?
It could be a terminology thing. I don't know if you experienced this, but like I was using the Spotty, the maps package, or it was like a store locator kind of thing. They have a package that does that, and I needed to. They had some things going on where they were hitting Google, and I didn't need to do that. And so I was trying to like say, hey, I just want to like tell a library, if you ever just touch this method on this class on this library, return this exact thing. And that is just so complicated to do. If like you're in your user controller, I would expect if like in the Mockery thing, I think you would have to call, like I was expecting to call the Spotty library, but it was like, no, you need to call your user controller and tell like your user controller when you hit this method on that library, then that's where it's going to happen. And so, but then when you're looking at the test, it's so confusing. I don't know. It's like, it's very complicated to write any type of Mockery in libraries. And so And then Nuno was streaming, and I noticed he was writing a feature for Laravel, and I noticed he wasn't mocking. He wasn't like he had like an environment variable where he just switched on and off. And I asked him like, why don't you do mocks? And he went into this like really long depth thing. I didn't expect that, of like why he hates mocks and why he doesn't do mocks. It's just because he's talking about how it really hides the application from the source of truth, like what's truly happening. Like, yeah, that's a good point, but I just don't want to call up Google, and I don't have to like put in these weird env like variables into my test unit just to be able to hit a live API. I want to basically mock that response, and so yeah, it's like Mockery is just kind of needs some love. It needs like, yeah, I would love just if you had a method or something, just like put a couple fake things on there, or like the colon fake, and then maybe pass it this method. This is what it responds with, or it's way more cumbersome than it needs to be, right? Am I dumb for thinking that?
No, you are not dumb at all. I agree 1,000%.
I don't get it.
1,000%. I've got a use case on why I hate Mockery as well. I don't hate it, but it's really, really hard when like you're trying to do some like deep level stuff. So the package that I made and published Conduit, Rapid SAS Conduit for merge loop, I had in there a class that would look using the composer, what is it? The composer facade, where it would look at your installed packages via composer.
Yeah.
I think it was like composer : installed version, whatever it is. And I was basically looking to see if you had, Stripe installed, or if you had Paddle, a composer paddle or a composer package for Paddle. And based on that, the application, this package would do certain things based on that payment provider. And I spent probably several nights trying to figure out how to write tests for that. Like, how do I test the checkout flow for Stripe? Now how do I fake the Paddle package being installed and run all my test suite again to make sure that works? And I literally couldn't figure it out. So I switched that whole project from using, this really nice, elegant way of determining what payment provider you had installed, and I had to use a config variable. Like I had to publish a config file that had a variable that says what payment provider you're using, Stripe or Paddle or et cetera. And then now in my tests, I could just say, hey, config set, to Stripe, or config set to Paddle. And it made me really hate it. It's like I had a really nice, elegant solution, and I was testing it locally. I was like, this is awesome. I don't have to do any config. It's, hands-off config. It just figures out what you're using and it can run with it. So now I have to use a config variable like every other package out there. And my tests suffer for it because I could not figure it out. How do you? I couldn't do it. Could not do it.
To do, yeah, in that situation where my like where I would think like a fixture, like a file, like would have like a fake set of composer packages underneath. I know like Laravel Cloud, they do some fake stuff of like where they include this fake array of repos, to be included into the Laravel Cloud project to when they like seed a project. And so maybe something like that might work in that case. But yeah, it's just like you want to reach for mock. I hate changing code for tests, like to be allowing to use their tests.
That's what I'm getting at. Yeah, exactly.
And setting up like fixtures and all that's nice, and then controlling that through an environment variable. But then you have to swap them out. But then it's like you really want to test the actual source of truth. It's hard. So
yeah, and the one that I was using, spanned across the whole application, so I couldn't set it once in like my base test case saying, hey, set the config to Stripe, because now I basically had to write 3 different versions of tests for all the payment providers. So I had to set them in every single file possible, and during the checkout, I've got to mock 3 different composer packages essentially for it, and it never worked. It never worked right. Just the way the tests run. When you set things up, in Pest with that before all or before each, like I don't know what the hell. I lost several nights of development on that approach. What I thought was going to be really nice and convenient for the developer just turned into a massive headache because I couldn't figure out Mockery. I was trying to overload, which I thought was, it's supposed to overload it in the entire application. I don't know, man. So I feel the pain. Firsthand experience of like, this should not be that hard to mock a method of a vendor file across the application. Shouldn't be that hard. Should be a one
Yeah.
line thing.
I'm always, you know how much of a stickler I am on testing of like if something's untested, I like lose my mind. And so of like just like when there's a new code change, it just it's hard on some, just hard to maintain it for the future. Or if another developer's looking at it, they break something, I just want to make sure it's solid for the future. But I was working on a like a personal website actually for my church. It's a YouTube integration checking in for like live streams. And that was also another situation where I needed to mock YouTube, like the response. I couldn't figure it out. It was like, yeah, I just got to a point like it took everything in me. I'm like, I'm not going to write a test for this. I'm just going to move on. So like, I know it works. And, but basically it's actually really cool. I've been thinking about writing up like, I don't want to get too off topic, but it's like, what it does is it downloads the YouTube live stream. And it pulls the subtitles. Like it uses Chat GPT. Like they have it converts it into an MP3, and then it sends it over to Chat GPT and converts it to captions. And then I could take those sub captions and make descriptions and do social media stuff with them. So it's it's kind of neat how that. But yeah, couldn't figure out how to mock it. Don't have a clue. Chat GPT. Now I do open the PHP OpenAI package has have like a really good thing on faking responses. That works tremendously. But those packages that don't, it's tough. So,
Yeah, especially like, I mean, baked in Laravel ones. I don't want to tell the whole same story a second time, but that same conduit package I've ran into this twice. Because with conduit, I've got a cart that you can make, and I've made it to where it can set a cookie for anonymous people, and mocking the cookie class in tests.
Yeah.
I don't want to deter anybody from using my conduit package, but I don't have tests for that cookie because
how do you mock a cookie?
I don't know how to figure it out. You have to mock whatever the underlying thing is, and it was just the biggest pain in my rear end possible. So there are very minimal tests for that cookie part because
I was just thinking openly, like I don't even like if we're doing something that was based off of a public cookie, I couldn't think off the top of my head of how to mock a cookie.
Yeah.
With that, so you'd have to figure that out, but tricky. That's why I'm like every time I have to reach for the Mockery class, I'm like, here we go. Like I'm gonna give myself plenty of time because it's gonna take me a while to figure this out. So yeah.
Oof. Nightmare fuel right there.
Yeah.
And the docs are great, so you can't fault them for the docs. It's just that the concept is really hard.
Yeah, you mentioned docs and documentation. One thing, the last thing I'll leave with is to stop using the GitHub Wiki. How do you say that?
Wiki.
Okay, because when I read it versus when I say it, just two different things. The GitHub. So stop using the GitHub Wiki. And use the repo docs, like /docs, and use your repository instead. I've come across like a few repos where they don't have documentation at all, or they're in the repo and they're like several years old, or if it's like just in the actual documentation area, or just like in /docs, it's actually kind of useful because if you're in the code, you could just like open the file. You don't have to like source over the GitHub and read all the docs or whatever. And I feel like they're not as updated as if they were in the docs file. I think and hear me out. I've been kind of looking into what it would take to create a GitHub action, and how this action would work is it would, on a new pull request, it would determine how many lines of code changes you have. And if there's like, say, a threshold that you set, say over 500 lines of code, it'll bump like a comment saying like, hey, we recommend checking out, looks like a significant change. We recommend changing the documentation, make sure it's up to date. And then you can, but you can work with that GitHub action in like inside there. You can say, hey, if there isn't a change in /docs or something, post this comment. And so I've been looking at possibly doing something like that, just to kind of hold myself accountable. And then obviously if there's changes, but obviously like a composer lock file does have more than 500 lines of code changes usually. So there's gonna be times where it is kind of annoying. So I think it's just how you have to word it. But I think someone coming with a new feature, it's so easy to get so ingrained into the future of like, hey guys, let's write some documentation on this. Like nobody says that. You really have to be purposeful about it, and it kind of nudges the developers in that right way. And I think it's Livewire. No, it's Filament. I'm pretty sure Filament does this, but Filament does, like, they have their docs in their code base of the actual framework or the the package. And so if you make a change in Filament, you also just you have to include the documentation. It's like, it's one of their items that they want you to do, like in their PR checklist. That's another way you could go, is like in your PR checklist. But you just did you update documentation? And so, but it just kind of forces people to really take that to, we hold our code base accountable and all those files in there accountable. We can really, if we have that docs folder in there, it's so easy to forget about that GitHub page on there. So,
I almost think if you could take a step forward since the rise of AI, if you just make a PR that doesn't have docs, if AI will just read your changes and make a doc file for you.
That's idea. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's idea right
Because it does that.
Yeah.
All right, Mo. Hey, Andy, cut this out.
Yeah.
Don't publish this part. But like, I use GitHub Copilot a lot for just writing like tests, like the base. I've got a file open. Hey, can you just sort of generate me the first round of tests? And then I'll go in and I'll modify. So if you've got something that's like a GitHub action that says, hey, you've got a new feature, no pushes to the docs file, probably should do that. Or, hey, click this button. We'll generate one based on your changes of this PR and publish that for you. Since, most actions now you can have them auto lint or pint or whatever, and just commit those changes back to the repo as it is. You just have that at the end of whatever push to a PR that goes to, your main branch or whatever. Just say, hey, regenerate the docs. Almost like, what's that package, that API one? Swagger?
Yeah.
Is that how Swagger does it with the doc blocks?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Something like that. So I'm on board. To hell with the wiki. 2025 is the year we end the wiki.
Yes.
There's no reason that a repo should have a repo just for docs. Just use the repo.
Yeah. Because I mean, it keeps it up to date, and it helps it just helps the team. Like, I went on a new project and I saw like a /docs like on the root. That was the first place I went. Well, I saw the README first. I kind of glanced at it, but then I went to the docs. I'm like, that just lets you know it's a good project. Like, they keep it real in there, like, keeping the documentation going. So it's not on an outdated version of what's that documentation markdown open source thing everyone likes to use. You know what I'm talking about? It's like a view thing. ViewPress. I don't know. Something like that. But it's not like this abandoned ViewPress or whatever it is that you abandon and people forget about it, or and people like writing code in their, or people like writing documentation in their code editor. At least I do. Maybe I'm weird.
I do.
But yeah. And so I feel like that's also part of the thing that helps, is like you don't have to go through the GitHub editor, which the GitHub editor is cool, but it just kind of, you can do it as you're developing. So makes sense.
Yeah, well, I agree with. I don't know if that's your hot take, but I don't think it's that.
Well,
hot.
here's I mean, this isn't really a hot take, but I think Laravel should also take a proactive step at this to an extent, but to their documentation. But their documentation is so diverse, like the Pint documentation and stuff. So it'd be kind of a pretty granular change. But I think that they should include the documentation in the framework. And so when somebody comes in with the change, they already have the docs. Because that's actually where a majority of my PRs come from. Like I see it, like I'll go through Laravel News and I'll see this really cool update, and I'll like, okay, I want to see the docs on this to, how do I use this thoroughly and have a good understanding of it. And I look there, it's not documented yet. And so then occasionally I'll see a comment from Taylor asking the guy to document it, and it was like 2 months to go and never got back to Taylor. So then I'll go through and I'll go under the hood, see how it works, and then contribute some documentation. That's how a majority of my PRs come from, is stuff like that. And so it'd be kind of cool for them to kind of enforce a rule like, hey, you want to PR to Laravel, also include the documentation. Doesn't have to be perfect, but just give us something. And but I mean, it kind of goes with Taylor rules of what he wants in and not into his documentation, but it doesn't allow anything to be left behind. It's in sync with, in parallel with one another. So
yeah, I think that would actually be really nice, because I think it was recently, or within the last couple of years, they released that Artisan command where you can like type in collections, and it'll open up the collections doc in your browser. How cool would that be if it just opened up in your IDE?
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Like,
Since
oh yeah, because it would pull
the
in the
MD
docs.
file's
Yeah.
already there,
Yeah.
wouldn't it be cool just to open in your IDE
Yeah.
right then and there?
I rarely ever go to the actual Laravel documentation anymore. I pull up my docs repo and I find stuff so much faster. Maybe it's just my search on there, but I feel like I have this method. Like for my use case was that I was trying to figure out when to use like without Vite or when I like because sometimes I get some projects where I don't have to include it, and sometimes it forces you to include it. You run your test, it's like you get that whole Vite, it's not compiled,
Manifest
whatever.
not there.
Right? Yeah. So then I'm like, I feel like I just should work. I was like, why do projects sometimes I have to include it? Why do I not? And I go to search it on the docs, nothing. And so, but then if I pull up on my like repo and I type it in, there you can reference it because I think it's just how it indexes the results. So if you type in a method, you have to go to the Vite doc, scroll down, and versus me, if I open my editor, it's right there. So yeah,
that's interesting. Yep. I've ironically I've got a bookmark that goes to I think it's the Laravel 9 documentation for string helpers, because in the new docs, they don't have like a list of all the available things that the string helper class can do now.
Really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So I always go back. So I've got the bookmark to 9 that has all of the, the available methods or whatever. Because if I try to search, Laravel string helpers, it'll take me to the newest version of the docs, which is correct. But I prefer the version 9 version of the docs. So I've always got those bookmarked, and ironically, it's either that page or the collections page are the two pages of the docs that I go to nonstop.
Like Google, they have this thing. At least when I type in Laravel validation rules, Google it says you visit this page frequently, like above the. It's like, okay, you call me out. So.
Listen, there's some things you can't commit. You can't commit everything to memory, and I'll admit that I can't remember hardly any other collection string helper methods if I don't look them up.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right, man.
I can't fit it in my brain.
All right, it's been a good show. You have anything else today?
I think that was it for me. I want to make sure that everybody knows that they had a happy new year and that 2025 is going to be your year. Be passionate.
Yes, try hard.
That fire.
Yes. Yeah. As Aaron says, have one kid or have 4 kids. Yeah, just have fun. Be on podcasts. Do things like this makes just like if you're still listening, this makes me totally uncomfortable. I'm sure Dalton, you can do the same.
Agreed.
And it forces me outside of my comfortability, and also it's fun to just chat what we're passionate about, even in a public space. So doing work publicly is something I'm trying to do more of, and I know you're trying to do that as well. So yeah, it's just getting out there and contributing back to the community and being a part of it. And so that's really how I feel like for me, I've grown more than I ever have before. So yeah. I highly recommend that if you're looking for something in 2025. There you go. Just get your work out there. Start a podcast. Come on our podcast. Yeah. We'd love to talk. If you love Laravel, we want to. If you know how to use Mockery, we're here. We want to know.
Come on.
So, all right, man. It's been good. You want to close this out?
Yeah. If again, like Andy said, if you've made it this far, thank you. Extra special thank you to you. We appreciate you, and we hope to see you whenever the next episode comes out in the next few weeks, next month. All right. Bye, guys.
See ya.